live. What's up, everybody?
How's it going, people?
How's it going? And we're live on Periscope and YouTube. And it is a Sunday afternoon. Rick's smoking a cigar. Tell us a little bit about this cigar.
So this is a Monte Cristo Platinum Edition Churchill, I believe. And I just picked it up at a local place. It looked like
Nice.
an interesting thing to try.
Yeah, Monte Cristo.
Yeah.
An early scope. We went for an early scope today because we were like hanging outside and like outdoors, in a naturey place. And
How's it going?
Yeah, what's up? What's up, Poperation? So we were just talking about this. We saw Yaron Brooks tweeted something about equality. The only way to achieve true equality is what did he say? Is
to break LeBron James's legs. And so I think the idea, I saw the podcast where he first mentioned that idea, and I think it's really telling, like, you know, and if you guys don't know who Yaron Brook is, you should check him out. YARONBROOK. So he was basically saying, look, like when you talk about inequality, they're always talking about economic inequality. And they never really extend those kinds of arguments into other arenas, but you can't achieve equality just by giving people more money, right? In the economic realm, you have to take it away from people. And so it's all about tearing the successful down and the people who have their fortunes, like taking their money away. But we would never accept that in other realms, like, oh, you're too tall, we need a redistribution of height, or like you're too smart, we need a, redistribution of grades, or you're too good at basketball. Like sports you can't touch. Like
You can't touch sports.
But to get equality, for me to be able to compete with LeBron James on the court, like, you'd probably have to break both of his legs and probably one of his arms for me to have a chance, and even then he'd probably win. So Jonathan Rosenberg brings
Jonathan Rosenberg started making videos, and yes, I did. That's like really awesome.
Congrats, man.
Yeah, congrats. If you link, I don't know if you can do this on Periscope, but in YouTube, like definitely link your YouTube channel so we can see it.
Thanks for your donation, Joe.
Thanks,
Anderson.
Joe.
We really appreciate it. Your super
chat.
And thanks. I've
Peter
gotten that
Parker.
before.
So the Periscope people can't see the YouTube people's comments.
Right.
So YouTube person, Joe.
Check her out on YouTube and subscribe to her if you haven't already.
Joe's calling him Peter Parker.
I haven't gotten that one. I've gotten the Clark Kent, but I appreciate both. So Jonathan Rosenberg mentioned something that I think is an important topic to discuss. What about equality of opportunity versus outcome? And I think that that's actually a false way to conceptualize it, because...
But isn't it like equality of opportunity, basically giving everybody...
I think...
everybody a chance to be good.
I think, though, when you're talking about equality of opportunity, there's a danger in that... I think it's correct that some leftists point out that, again, bringing it back to the basketball realm, I'm never going to have the same opportunity to be a professional basketball player as LeBron James, because I don't really play basketball at all, except sometimes with my friends. And I'm not going to have the same kind of opportunities to become a billionaire as Donald Trump, because I wasn't born in a 1%er family.
Right,
now,
so it's like the opportunity is coming from like pre-existing outcomes, from an outcome, like a previous outcome.
Yeah, and that's not to say that that's bad.
So
I don't think it is.
in order to cause equal opportunity, you need to make equal outcomes.
Right, and so you would need to say
you need
have
to
a 100%,
break LeBron James's legs.
Yeah, exactly. You need to have a 100% inheritance tax to ensure that people can't inherit money, and that's also bad. That's just as bad, and then you get back into the same argument. So But again, that's not to say that it's impossible for people to rise through the ranks, especially in a much more capitalistic world where there's fewer barriers to entry and stuff, and there's fewer regulations and restrictions. Like John Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie, some of the richest men in history, and they were born in abject poverty.
Really?
Yeah, like Rockefeller started as a child laborer. He was an assistant to, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been like Vanderbilt. Like he was working for Vanderbilt, who was another business tycoon in the 19th century. And he was making like pennies per day.
So what about Vanderbilt? Vanderbilt was also one of those, right?
I'm not as familiar with Vanderbilt, but I know he started really, really small. Like he actually started, he was like a railroad baron, but he started out as a, he was into, he had a steamboat business, and he was competing with a government subsidized ferry, and his ferry system was way more efficient because it wasn't bailed out by the taxpayer every year. And I think his opponent was funded with like over $1 million a year, which back then was like a ton of money. And he was still able to not only crush the competition, but then once railroads started taking off, he started getting into that business really early. You guys should check out The Men Who Built America. It's a fantastic TV series, and it's like 4 episodes, and it's about like the big industrial tycoons in America.
Interesting.
Like, one episode's on Vanderbilt, another one's on Rockefeller, and I think the other ones are Carnegie and Henry Ford.
Oh wow, interesting.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go off track too much, but yeah.
So really there's no such thing as like equal opportunity.
No, and that's fine. Like you're not entitled to it.
There's no such thing as equal opportunity without forcing equal outcome. And so the only way to have equal opportunity or equal outcome is really just like is really to like limit prosperity and limit success.
100%. Like there was a senator that I saw giving a speech, and he said once you set up a minimum wage, you're creating a floor that no one can go below, but when you build a floor, you're also building a ceiling because no one can rise above a certain amount because you're forcing them to pay a certain amount of money to their employees.
Yeah, and it's like, of course, the really rich will, like, all these like policies and laws and regulations, and we've been seeing this with COVID also, and this is like might seem a little bit far-fetched, but all these like policies and stuff, the only people that can handle them are the people who are like already at the top.
Right.
These like already existing chains that already have a lot of money and are already doing really well, those people are still going to survive. They're still going to survive the minimum wage. They're still going to survive these lockdowns, these coronavirus lockdowns, which, as we've been seeing, like we've been walking around, most of these, it's usually the smaller places that are like not going to come back. They're
Right.
not going to survive these crazy rules. The people who are going to survive them are the people who are already at the top.
Right. And I mean, that's not to begrudge, these really wealthy and successful corporations. It's just that they're not hit as hard when they have larger reserves of capital that they can use to basically support, not making a profit for a few months, right? Yeah, well, Walmart and Amazon getting richer, I don't know about Walmart. I know Amazon stock has done really well.
Yeah, I mean, Walmart also, like, the only places that were open while these mom and pop shops, I don't like this lighting is like going away, but like the only places that are like still open while these mom and pop shops were like forced to close were Walmart and like Target and these places.
Yeah, and I mean,
and then people are like blaming it on them, but
it's not their fault.
It's not their fault. It's the fault of the people who are like who are trying to force equality.
Yeah, and I mean,
it's the fault of these like legislators and politicians who are like, oh no, like the 1%, like we have to stop the 1%. But like everything that you're doing is hurting the average person.
Right. And I mean, I think that the problem that happens is, like, I don't mean to diminish the fact that there are some companies that are actively supporting their own destruction. Like, there are some of these companies, like Facebook, like when Zuckerberg went to Congress and said, yeah, we should be regulated. Like, that mentality is...
Facebook and Zuckerberg can afford to say, like, we should be regulated because they're like...
Then they'll become too big to fail and whatever. Like, I know...
They're all like, yeah, we should be... Facebook and, like, people, these companies at the top want regulations. They want more regulations because it's not going to hurt them. It's going to hurt the bottom people, the newcomers. Like, it doesn't...
Some of them do. I think some of them don't. Like, there was the guy who owned Whole Foods before, if I'm not mistaken, John Mackey or something. Before they sold to Amazon, he was very, like, well known for being... He's kind of kooky in a lot of ways. Like, he's into transcendental meditation and stuff, I think. But he's also, like, pretty free market, and he's against a minimum wage and things like that. The former chairman of BB&T, John Allison, was actually a prominent objectivist, and he was, like, very much, like, against the bailouts. The government forced BB&T to take bailout money during 2008, even though they didn't need it.
Interesting.
And they were like, otherwise you're going to get regulated to death. So they took the minimum and they paid it back as soon as they could. But, like, I think people like that, like, if we had a few more corporations that were, you know, like, actively standing up and actively saying, you have no right to regulate me, you're just trying to tear me down because I'm successful, and these antitrust laws are awful, like, we would be in a much better place, and we would not have nearly as much nonsense in the culture right now, trying to regulate big tech and all this other BS. Like, I think a lot of these people are part of the problem when they're not only when they're supporting their own destruction, like the Amazon people saying we need a higher minimum wage and stuff, but also people who are just silent. Like, they should actively be defending themselves.
Why?
Like,
Why would they do it if it doesn't, like, immediately and directly help them?
Thanks for the donation, Jonathan Reutenberg.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah. Sorry, what were you saying?
Um,
Anti-capitalism.
Jonathan says, thanks for letting me promote my channel in your feed.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, and it didn't go so well for Microsoft when they stood up huge fan Mr. Adams. Like, yeah, but the thing is, the reason that it didn't is, so the story behind that, as I understand it, is Bill Gates didn't spend a dime on lobbying. He didn't have an office lobbying in Washington, D.C. And then all these prominent senators, including some Republicans, the guy from Utah, Orrin Hatch, before Romney took his seat,
Yeah.
he was saying, like, you know, oh, don't you think it's, you know, bad for your business if you don't have a lobbying presence here in D.C.? Openly questioning him on the stand, and then a couple months later, there was the antitrust case against Microsoft. And the argument was, you're destroying the competition with paid browsers because you're bundling Internet Explorer for free with new computers. So you're being anti-competitive.
You're being, like, anti-competitive by making your brand better.
And by making people more prosperous by not having to pay, I think a subscription fee for Netscape, which was one of the big browsers at the time, was like $100 a year. And instead, you're bundling it for free.
Right.
Like...
So it's like, instead of like going after people who are trying to take other companies down, they're going after people who are just simply making themselves better.
Yeah, and...
like, bettering their own companies.
Yeah, and that's the whole premise behind antitrust laws. It's not even about, like, what's good for the consumer. It's about, well, it's dangerous. These people have too much power. They don't have power unless you buy their stuff.
Do you think this is a mentality that's, like, a new thing? Do you think this is, like, a new... Because...
No, I think it's just a magnification of things that have been in the culture for a long time.
Like, I feel like our culture is going a little bit more as we become more like statist, we're also becoming more like anti-prosperity.
Yeah.
Like
They're intrinsically linked, those two ideas.
A sin is like becoming better, having more money, doing better in life, being like a winner or being successful is like a sin.
Yeah.
Not and it's like a culture of like Karening. Like
Yeah.
Like they will literally ask other people to promote to police like their neighbors or like other companies or whatever.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's like you were saying about like Maoist China and stuff, like reporting on your neighbors, like that tweet that you sent out. Like it's about reporting on your neighbors and your friends and your family. Like that's not even just Karening. That's like
Whoa.
like narking on your own family. I can't imagine the kind of awful human being that would narc on a family member for not being statist enough.
Apparently in like Soviet Russia, people would do that.
All these
And then like
countries.
everyone would cheer them on, like, oh great, good for you, like you exposed your dad who's like anti-communist.
Yeah, and it's often not even anti-communism. It's like, oh, you weren't crying enough when Kim Jong-un died, or Kim Jong-il, whoever the last guy was. Like they'll literally be thrown in prison, probably in a concentration camp, and along with their children and grandchildren, if they don't cry hard enough, or if they don't have portraits of the dear leaders. And not only that, but if you don't save those portraits first, when your house is burning down, you can get thrown in a concentration camp.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And it's, you know, obviously this is a much more extreme version of that, and it's obviously way worse when it's the government doing it than people. Yeah, Zhou Enlai had his own son executed, and Stalin, his son was captured by the Nazis.
Zhou Enlai had his own son executed?
I haven't heard that, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like, Zhou Enlai is kind of, like, I hate this culture where people will, like, look at people who are slightly less insane communists, and they'll be like, oh, this guy was a great reformer. Like, people do this with Deng Xiaoping, who was kind of the guy that opened up China. He created modern China by allowing foreign investment to come in and some semblance of private property to occur. But, like, he was also the guy in charge when Tiananmen Square happened, and they rolled in tanks to literally run over protesters who were just demonstrating peacefully. Like, thousands and thousands of people died.
Yeah.
Like, and, you know, 1.4 billion people are still enslaved by this awful government because he did that. When, you know, they could have toppled communism like Eastern Europe did. This has happened since the Great Society, Fonzolito won. This has been happening since the Great Society destroyed the black family, others too. It's been going on since Teddy Roosevelt started really going after monopolies in the early 1900s. And I mean, even the late 19th century, there were a lot of movements to do this kind of stuff. Like, obviously, it was not nearly as bad. And FDR and Woodrow Wilson are probably more responsible for this than anything else with the New Deal. But the Great Society was another step towards this sort of statist, fascist economic nonsense.
So how do you think that ties in with the cultural shift towards like even just culturally, not necessarily when it comes to like antitrust laws, but because there has to be a, like, it seems like all tied in with the way that racial or like demographic culture wars are happening.
I think race.
How does that tie?
I think race, the race conflict stuff is very closely linked to the economic class warfare stuff. I think that part of the problem is you have these sort of Marxist professors who will use Marxist economic theory and apply it to race. So the whole idea that you have this working class that's oppressed by this capitalistic ruling class, and they'll just switch out, capitalist ruling class with white people and like, the working class with, say, minorities. In Nazi Germany, they did it with the Jews. Like, these Jews are oppressing us. They're overrepresented in all these fields, And if you switch out BLM stuff when they say white people for Jews, it sounds like a Hitler speech. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, rather than saying let's try to build up, and don't get me wrong, I do think that like black families and people of color are particularly harmed by a lot of these welfare policies, government schools that keep them from learning, like LAUSD. What was the one statistic? I think in the city of Chicago, it costs about $7,000 a year per child to educate them, and the Catholic Church does it for half the amount. So you know that private schools would be much more efficient.
Jiraj, what was your idea? Jiraj is like, hey, I have an idea for this video.
Yeah. Woodrow Wilson was in fact decidedly racist. He segregated the military and federal government. Fonzolito's
He's reading
right.
the comment from Periscope, so just respond to that.
Yeah.
Because not everybody, like...
Yeah, so Fonzolito on Periscope said Woodrow Wilson was decidedly racist, segregated the military and federal government. That's correct. And Woodrow Wilson was an awful human being. He championed the idea of what was called like the lost cause theory of the Civil War, which was that the Confederacy was basically morally justified. Like, I think he was from the South originally, and like when he was a student at Princeton, he was like openly saying shit like that. And yeah, he's an awful human being, and he was awful in terms of his rhetoric. Like, he decried the separation of powers as this sort of backward, like horse and buggy constitution. Like, what? It's so clunky. We need a powerful executive that's going to be able to unify the country and just make decisive action.
Someone on Periscope said I look like a female version of Jerry Seinfeld. Everybody says that. What?
I don't really see that. I don't know how they...
No, a lot of people say that.
Is that racist?
Why?
Are they making an anti-Semitic remark? All you look the same?
Well, Jerry Seinfeld's like Ashkenazi Jewish.
Yeah, that's right. Barnes Law on Periscope said Wilson also premiered the pro-KKK Birth of a Nation film at the White House, and that's true. I think it was the first movie that was ever showed at the White House, if I'm not mistaken, was this movie called Birth of a Nation, which was basically like promoting this lost cause theory of the Civil War, and basically shows the KKK as this like heroic group of individuals who were like rising up to challenge Reconstruction. Like, it's awful. It's absolutely awful. He was an awful human being, and I think it's kind of telling that, he used to be held up as this progressive icon, and now he's not really talked about in a lot of these circles anymore.
I have a question.
What's up?
So, I feel like this is kind of like a little bit off topic, but I feel like there seems to be this trend where like these big cities there seems to be this trend in like big cities where people will be like a city will grow and become big and vibrant and whatever. Like a city will have like a city will be like there seems to be this trend in like the culture of cities and also states. Like
right.
In California, for example, we saw that we see this in like anywhere that starts off like suburban or like not so crowded and becomes more crowded and more metropolitan. They always end up turning more towards that mentality, towards that like sort of lefty mentality,
right?
Big city mentality. Was that always a thing, or is it just a recent thing? Like even like you could tell how people are gonna vote and how the ideology is based on how metropolitan the city is.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that originates in, and I don't think it's inherently because of big cities, but I do think that's been a trend where a lot of the time
Like it will be like maybe an independent or like a swing state or whatever,
Yeah.
even like a red state, and then more people will move and more people will move there. Let's say like the innovators and creative types will move there and start building and whatever, and they'll make it into something big, and then it will turn blue.
I think there's a very common trend where people who are born into wealthy families have guilt over money that they feel like they did not earn. So, like, for example, Teddy Roosevelt was born into a fairly wealthy family. He grew up, if I'm not mistaken, in Long Island, but like right outside New York City, spent a lot of his life in New York City. New York City is like the ultimate example of this, where, you know, you have this like educated bourgeois, you know, upper middle class, highly educated, that starts to promote these like progressive reforms, which is like, you know, at the time it would be stuff like, we need prohibition, we need temperance to sort of, you know, stop these social ills in society, we need to get the government to like ban alcohol, or like a lot of times it would be voluntary, but like it would turn into like, we need the government to stop these poor people from like making these bad decisions. And somebody earlier, it was Fonz Alito. FDR was not much better, appointed Hugo Black, a KKK lawyer, to the Supreme Court. That's correct. And a lot of FDR's appointees, Fonz Alito pointed out, FDR is responsible for the internment of Japanese Americans in World War II. And a lot of the Supreme Court appointments that FDR made were responsible for the decision that allowed Japanese internment during World War II, and they constitutionally sanctified it. And a lot of it was this judicial progressivism saying, we need to just allow the elected branches of government, we should just defer to the president, we should defer to Congress and whatever they want to do, because who are we to overturn the law? Like Oliver Wendell Holmes was like a big progressive who said, you know, if the people want to go to hell, as a judge, it's my job to help them get there. Now, like, and now conservatives have adopted the same argument. Like that one friend of yours, I won't name him because like I don't want to dox, but like we were FaceTiming him the other day and he was saying like, you know, yeah, like just because these laws are bad, we shouldn't like be overturning laws passed through democratic institutions. It's like, well, no, that is the Supreme Court's job. It is to overturn unjust laws that violate people's rights.
Unjust based on what?
Based on the
like,
Constitution.
The Constitution?
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Nice. Lincoln was one of the inspirations for Karl Marx. I don't think there's any merit to that. I think that Lincoln had some weird views on economics, but I think libertarians that are like pro-Confederacy are really, really like going off the rails when they start saying that like the Civil War was unjustified. I mean, obviously, the secession of the U.S. from Britain was justified because it was to create a freer country, and the Confederates were trying to create a country that justified slavery, right? Like, their entire purpose in breaking away was...
So, basically, the only way to, like, stop people from having this, like, haves and have-not mentality and become a little bit more pro, like, growth and success and mobility is starting from the parents. For parents to stop spoiling their kids rotten and like let their kids work for what they want.
I think one of the most
and like be like
Chaz is not justified because they want to create an independent country for the purpose of oppressing people and like redistributing their wealth. And like, I'm not an anarchist. Like, I'm not down with like completely abolishing the police departments. That's stupid. And it like the reason that we have government is to protect our rights.
All right.
Unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is government schools. Unfortunately, this is what the institutions teach in these indoctrinated to believe these equivocals, the prodigal heel. Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is that, yeah, like these government schools that teach kids about, like, you know, the importance of the state and the importance of government, and like, not just the importance of government, but like the government should be doing all these awful things. And yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna hang out a little bit. So see you all later.
Oh, okay.
You have a quote, like a last quote or whatever.
Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
Hell yeah. See you all. See you
Keep it
later.
real.